You read the title. In order to understand how vinyls work, we need to understand how we recorded music in the first place. On April 9, 1860, 17 years before Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, Parisian inventor Edouard Leon Scott de Martinville made a recording on a phone autograph, which worked by tracing sound waves onto paper blackened by smoke. Unplayable for more than a century, this recording was recently brought to life by new audio technology. On the recording, Scott is heard singing a snippet of the French folk song Au clair de la lune. This 11-second snippet of song is the world's first instance of recorded sound.
Back with another milk.
Scott's phonograph was made to mimic an eardrum, attached to a thin, needle-looking stylus that traced a sheet of paper covered in soot. As you sang your song, it dragged the stylus across the sheet of paper. As for playing the sound back, forgive me, I got this from Wikipedia, a phonogram could be converted back into sound by photoengraving the tracing into a metal surface to create a playable groove, then using a stylus or diaphragm similar to those of the phonograph to reverse the recording process and recreate the sound. Which is basically saying they took the lines found on the drawing and carved them into grooves on a disc. But let's move further into the future, shall we? Gramophones, otherwise known as a phonograph, or a record table, or a turntable, were created in the 1940s and worked similarly to a record player, taking a stylus attached to a diaphragm that transferred the cuts and grooves of a recording medium into sound. Now, even though this does look like vinyl, it's actually made from shellac, a resin from the Indian lac insect. We'll see the use of vinyl later, but if you listened earlier, there's one thing I mentioned that explained how these old-timey music makers work: a diaphragm. This is a little confusing, so I'm going to go way back to explain how this works. Sound, simply put, is vibrations in the air, which travel as waves, like ripples on a pond. To record sound, we need to convert these air vibrations into a physical form that can later be reproduced. A diaphragm's role is to respond to these sound waves. When you speak or make noise near a diaphragm, the sound waves travel through the air and hit the diaphragm, which is typically made of a light flexible material, such as a thin piece of metal that vibrates when sound waves hit it. So these vibrations change depending on the frequency, or pitch, or how fast it vibrates, intensity, how loud it is, and amplitude, the height. So this diaphragm, connected to a stylus through the stylus bar, is touching a recording medium, which is the rotating disc, aka the shellac or vinyl. As the diaphragm vibrates, the stylus does as well. In early mechanized recording systems, the stylus uses the vibrations of the diaphragm in a disc-cutting laugh like this. It then proceeds to etch grooves into the surface of the disc. Loudness, or the amplitude, affects the depth of the groove. The louder, the deeper the groove. The pitch, or the frequency, affects the spacing of the grooves. Higher frequencies result in smaller, more tightly packed grooves, while lower frequencies result in wider, more spaced out grooves. Did you get that? If not, here's a summary. I know this is going to be hard to translate. What even is diaphragm in Spanish? So your vinyl, or shellac disc back in the day, stores the recording of the sound with its groove. When you place the stylus or the needle in the precise spot, it follows the same path the previous stylus did, causing the diaphragm to vibrate in the same way it once did when the sound was first being made. These vibrations of the diaphragm create compressions and refractions in the air, pushing and pulling on the surrounding air particles, which creates a pressure wave, aka sound. As sound waves travel through the horn, they're amplified loud enough to be heard. Nowadays, these diaphragms are put inside microphones and turned into electrical signals, which is means by which sound waves travel, by a metal ribbon or wire that flows into the source computer to replay the sound. Now that we have a place to store the sound, we can electrically create the same grooves in a vinyl we did mechanically. In record players today, you'll find a cartridge, a small device found at the end of a tone arm, with either a moving magnet or a moving coil producing the sound waves. Invented in the 1930s, a moving magnet worked by moving in relation to the stylus, like a seesaw, which creates an electrical signal that's sent to the speakers. It's strong and simple, so it's cheaper and more frequently used. 10 years later, moving coils were introduced, as well as vinyls over shellac, and they work by having coils move in relation to the stylus. This one is considered more sensitive and better quality, but it's more expensive and needs more care. Once the electrical signal is made, it's still pretty weak and needs to pass through a photo preamp, which can amplify the signal. After, it gets a final amplification from the power amplifier that brings it to a level that can start the speakers. The speakers then convert the electrical signal back into sound by moving the air with the diaphragms, recreating the original sound waves. Going further into the future, 80s or 90s kids probably remember burning their own CDs instead of building their own phonograms. According to Wikipedia, CDs overtook vinyl sales in 1988, and by 1992, music cassette tapes. Luckily for the length of this video, CDs and DVDs work similarly when it comes to music. Besides Reddit and Quora, the only sources I could find on this is from Lenovo. The burning process works by using a laser in your disk drive to change the color of a dye layer in the disk. This creates a pattern of light and dark areas that represent binary code, a language that computers use to store and process information. Basically, the surface of the CD or DVD is smooth, with tiny bumps called pits and flat areas called lands arranged in a spiral. A laser light shines on the surface of a disc, and when the laser hits the lands, it reflects back normally, but when it hits the bumps, the light reflects differently. Then, based on the way the light bounces back, tells the reader whether it's a pit or a land, that the computer can translate into data like music, videos, or files. DVDs work similarly, but the pits are smaller and more closely packed, so they can hold more data than CDs. Well, what have we learned? For starters, I haven't talked about the brand change. Look at my hair, I got custom hair. But back to music. The easiest way to understand how vinyls work is to understand what sound waves are and how we use a diaphragm to store them physically and electronically. There were a few times where I had to take a leap of faith in my analysis, so if there's anywhere that I messed up, feel free to let me know. I guess I did kind of go off the rails at the end here, so thanks if you stayed.